Okay, today's stuff we're going to learn is Bava Metzia Daf Tzadi Gimel. Today's stuff is sponsored by Becky Goldstein in honor of a double family simcha. My cousin became a Kalan. Her brother and sister-in-law, Rabbi Tzvi and Lori Engel, are celebrating the bat mitzvah of Adar Bina in Chicago. During these trying days, we're grateful for the loving kindness bestowed on us by all. May we continue to learn and grow together and soon see Geulah Shlema. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to get started. I want to go back a little, though, because I found the end of yesterday's stuff was the most confusing part and kind of done at the end. So I'm going to go back and review, even though this will maybe delay us a little bit, but I thought it was important. So we're going to start with the Tashma, the 9th attempt to try to prove, is it Mishalo or is it Mishamayim? Remember, the big question is, do we say that when a worker has a right to eat, it's a God-given gift, or it's actually like an extra addition to the salary? If it's an extra addition to the salary, then it's the person's money. They could do with it what they want. If it's a God-given gift, then it's really meant for them, and and then we'll see what the ramifications are. So in our source, we're going to try to say Tashma. I'm going back about 15 lines from the bottom, maybe even more. So maybe I'll just review the Mishna outside. A person can make an arrangement with the person whose field it is and say, listen, instead of eating, I'm not going to eat on the job, or my son or my daughter or my slave or any of these people won't eat on the job, my wife, but I want to take the money instead. I want you to pay me instead of $100, $120. So you can do this with any adult. Why? Because either you can do it for yourself, you can decide for someone else with their agreement. The assumption is that they're asking you to take care of it for them. But you can't do it for any minor, not for your minor children, not for your minor slaves, because they need to decide for themselves that they don't want this. Now, this proves that it's Mishamayim, because the point is, since it's a God-given gift, only the person themselves can decide. If the person doesn't have the ability to say, I don't want it, because they're too young to understand, then you can't do it. So that's what we tried to prove. But then they said, no, because then the Gemara went and said, right, we assume this is, by the way, when they're ma'aleh lehem mizonot. And then we're going to say, also, we had to add one thing to prove this, because if they're financially dependent, that's why we assume the father's dealing with this. So if you say mishum, the father gets the money, because they're all together in money, and that's why he can make these decisions for the older ones, not for the younger ones. Well, if it's Mishalo, and if he feeds them food, and if all the money is the same, then theoretically he should be able to decide for the children, and that's why it must be Mishamayim. To which they say, no, we could just say, what do you mean? The Mishnah, it doesn't prove it's Mishamayim, because you could say, maybe it's a case where they're financially independent, and then it really is Mishalo. It really is, it all has to do with, I can decide. But in this case, I can't decide because my children, and they're financially independent. And therefore, it's up to them to decide it. If they're too young, they can't decide. If they're old, if they're older, and that's what they said, that was where, we kind of asked, how can I decide for my older children? And we said, no, it's that I decided with their agreement. Okay. And then we don't have an answer because it's not clear whether he gives them, where they eat with him, they're financially dependent on him, or they're not. And then we don't have an answer. Then the Gemara brought, and this really, we can view this as a 10th attempt. And here we're actually going to come up with an answer, because what we're going to do in this section, and I'm going to go back and start again from there because it's kind of confusing, is we took this other version of our Mishnah, which was Rabbi Hoshaya's version, and there was one difference. Instead of saying, we had in the Mishnah, we had your older children, and not your animals, not your slaves, and not your children, if the slaves and children are minors. That's what the Mishnah had said. In his version, it's all the same. I'm not going to read it again inside, except for Avdov v'shivchato knanim, ben gdolim ben ktanim, you can arrange for them. And now we're going to have to resolve what's the difference between them. We're actually going to go through 4 different attempts. We're going to reject them all, and then we're going to go back and reinstate the first. And the first was, the difference between our Mishnah and the Braita is exactly this machloket, Mishamayim or Mishalo. So this first answer we're going to go back to in the end and say this is really the answer, in which case we're going to have an answer to our question. It's not really an answer. It's not the kind of answer we love, but the answer is there is no answer because there's 2 different opinions. That's the answer. So, and you could say, in other words, it's a tannaitic debate. So now we say the following. It's a good question to call this a tannaitic debate or not. In other words, we're saying this is Rabbi Hoshaya's version of the Mishnah, which I guess meant there were two versions floating around in the time of the Tanaim because there were two different opinions about this. There's a study guide today, and this is all charted out in the study guide, which might help you. So now we're going to start with Kotsetsa Yidov Dov Shukato, Bing Dolim Bing Tanim. We're now about 6 or 7 lines from the bottom of the page, 6 lines. So my lab idi be idi b'maleh mizanot. Now the whole debate is going to be: are they dependent on him? Or they're not dependent on the father or owner. So if we assume both cases, right, both the Mishna and the Braita are talking about they're financially dependent on the owner. Ubaha kamiflage. So then the machloket is mar savar mishalo, mar savar mishal shamayim. So the Mishnah holds mishamayim, and that's why you can't deprive your children, minor children, not minor slaves, at all. According to the Braita, it's a case where we hold, they hold it's mishalo. Since they're all financially dependent on me, well, when it comes to the slaves, all the slaves' money is mine, and therefore they're dependent on me, and therefore I can decide for them. And that's why the Braita says I can decide, because all their money they make is mine, and therefore I could say, you're not eating, we're getting extra money. Then the Gemara said, okay, this is just review from yesterday, but I'm organizing a little bit better. No, you don't necessarily say that. You could say that both the Mishnah and the Braita think it's all mine. In other words, it's my right in general, okay? But lo kashya. Okay, now we're going to distinguish. Are they being supported or not being supported by the master? So if the master supports them, and now again, it's my money to decide about, because that's how, right? That's what we're holding. It's not mishamayim, it's not a gift that I can't really decide for anyone else about, but it's mine. And if I give you food and you're dependent on me, then I can decide for you. If I don't give, and that's the Braita, if I don't give you food and you're my slave, right? Let's say I don't give you food and you're financially independent, then I can't decide for you. And you can't decide for yourself because you're a minor. So that must be the case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said no, because it's a case where they're not financially dependent. So it's all, we always have to change something. It's all the same theory about this, mishalo, but it's different circumstances. Are they financially independent or not? So now we're going to have two problems with this. We ended yesterday with the first problem. We're first going to focus on the Braita's explanation, that it's ma'aleh mizanot, and raise a problem with that. Well, and then we're going to focus on, if you say the Mishnah's ma'aleh mizanot, we're going to have a problem with that. So the problem with the Braita is, if they're financially dependent on you and you can decide for them, then why can't you decide for the children? And that was what we ended with yesterday. We said, because children you can't torture, okay? Telling the child you can't eat on the job is torturing the child. You can't tell the child, your own children, I'm torturing you, you can't eat. Interestingly, that you can't tell a slave, and you can, and also, by the way, you can't do it to an animal, because remember, the animal neither thought you could do it. So it's a little bit weird that we put the slave in a more difficult place than an animal. Anyway, we're going to reject this. So obviously it's, they could have asked that question as well. Now we're going to go zoom into the Mishnah. So what did we say the case in the Mishnah is? I'm now in the last words of Tzadi Ben. The case of the Mishnah is, right now, again, we hold mishalo, it's all mine, so I can decide, and they're financially independent. Since they're financially independent, though, I can't decide for them. So theoretically, I should be able to decide, at least, when I work, I can, and if they were dependent on me, I could. But in this case, the whole issue is, and the reason I can't decide for any minors is because they are not dependent on me. Well, what does it mean for a slave not to be dependent on you? If you remember, we had a big machloket about this. So now they're going to say the following. Hani chalamanda amal, this all works well and fine if you hold the ein harav. Now it's a little bit difficult because of the double negatives, but I'll try to explain it very clearly in a second. First, I'll translate the words and then we'll say very in one word what this means. Limanda amar, this all works well and fine, the Mishnah, if you hold that ein harav yachol lomar le'eved aseimi beni zamcha shapir. If you think that a master can't tell his servant or her servant, work for me, I get all your salary, but I'm not going to feed you. If the master can't do that, then what does that mean? That means the master has no right to do that. That means that if I decide as a master not to feed my slave, the slave becomes financially independent. All the salary goes to the slave. So if all the salary goes to the slave, then that's perfect here, because what happened? I don't give them food. That's what we said. The Mishna is a case where I don't give my slave food. So if I don't feed my slave, what does that mean? It means all the salary of the slave goes to the slave. And that exactly is why I cannot make an arrangement for the slave, because the slave doesn't work for me. The salary is not mine. So even if we hold mishalo, that the right to eat is the right of the person, right? The person or whoever gets the salary. Well, whoever gets the salary here is not me. It's the minor slave. If it's the minor slave can't make a decision about this. And that's why I can't make an arrangement for them, because they can't be mochel because they don't have dat. So that works perfectly for the Mishnah. But there's a different opinion, which is, I could say to my slave, some people think, I'm not giving you food, but I still get your salary, because, that's how it works with slave. I own the slave. I could do whatever I want according to this. Not whatever I want, but in this area, I could do that. If I can do that, then what happens here? Let's just play it out. I don't give the slave food. The salary still goes to me. If we hold mishalo, which is what we said, everybody holds mishalo according to this interpretation. We're in option number 2. Then I can decide for the slave. So why can't I? Right? If the slave's a minor, who cares if the slave's a minor? The salary's mine. So I can make a decision and I could say, don't eat. So there's nothing we can do. There's no way to explain that. So we have to reject option 2 because it doesn't work according to that theory. Well, once we establish that there's a machloket about this, we can say the following. Ela v'idi, both the Mishnah and the Braita, again, both hold mishalo. And what's the debate between them? B'she'ein ma'aleh lehem mizonot. The situation is, I don't give the slave food. Now, what's the machloket? Timar savar yachol, umar savar ein yachol. It's exactly this debate. The Mishnah holds, you can't say, asei mi ve'eni zancha. The Mishnah says, I can't decide for the slave. Why not? Because the slave is, if I say, I can't say that. I can't say, eat and give me your salary, which don't eat. I won't give you food. And I won't give you salary. I'm sorry. And your salary goes to me. I can't do that. Which means that if I don't give the slave food, the slave is financially independent. The slave is financially independent. That exactly explains why I have no rights to make any arrangement for the slave, because again, the slave's a minor. Rabbi Yochanan, I'm sorry, Umar, but the Braita holds I can't. If I can say, I'm not giving you food and all your salary goes to me, then the slave is dependent on me financially. And that's why I can decide and say, listen, don't eat on the job. And I get the money for it, right? The financial amount. So that would be the machlok. However, there's one small problem. It's a smaller problem, but it is a problem. Rabbi Yochanan we happen to know, what does Rabbi Yochanan hold? The Amar Yachol Harav. Rabbi Yochanan on this machloket, he sides on the side that the master can say, Asei mi ve'eni zancha. They can say, I'm not feeding you, and right. And what does the slave have to do? By the way, I saw Becky, you wrote what he's going to die. The slave has to go begging for money. That's just the only choice he has. He has to go knocking on doors and begging for money. So if you hold that, then that explains the Braita, right? So now we're going to have a problem, because Shavit Manita Ba'avik Braita. If this is a machloka between the Braita and the Mishnah, well, there's no way Rabbi Yochanan would choose the Braita over the Mishnah. Mishnayot are always stronger in the world of Gemara, right? We always prefer a Mishnah than a Braita. It doesn't make sense. Rabbi Yochanan would hold like a Braita instead of a Mishnah when it disagrees with the Mishnah. So if we say that that's the whole difference between them, it doesn't fit in with other things we know to be true, which is Rabbi Yochanan holds that way. It wouldn't make sense that he would ignore the Mishnah. So reject option number 3. Moving to option number 4. Ela dekule alma mishal shamayim hu ochel v'lo matzeh katz. Okay, everybody holds. Actually, now we're going to flip. Everybody holds it's a God-given gift, and since or a gift given by the Torah says you get this, you can eat on the job, and no one can take that away from you. And therefore, unless you yourself decide to. Well, you're a minor, you can't decide, your decisions don't mean anything, so you're stuck. So you can't. There's no way the master or father can do this for the child, for the slave. So then we have a problem. The Braita says the master can decide for the slave. So my kotzetz to Amar Rav Oshaya. So what is this kotzetz then? We're now going to explain it as something else. Mizonot. Okay, what does that mean? Rashi explains. She'iten lahem mizonot mi'ikara harbe. That I go to the person who they're working for and I say, listen, I want to get, instead of $100, I want you to give me $120. The slave won't eat. I'm not going to promise the slave won't eat, because I'll feed the slave a lot before, so they won't be hungry on the job, and then they won't eat. In that case, you could do it. Okay, you can say, I'm giving them food so that they don't eat on the job. I'll feed them a huge meal before, and then give me the money for it. Now, that, right, that's what we're now going to assume the Braita is saying. So when it comes to your minor slave, you can do this. Okay, now, the problem is, what's the problem? Well, then you should do the same thing with a animal. You should be able to do it. Feed the animal a lot before, and then send the animal to work. And but we know you can't do that, because it said in the Braita, that that we just said can say you can do this to the slave. You can't do it to the animal, so it doesn't fit in with the Braita. So that option didn't work, and therefore, after 4 attempts, we're now going to go back to option number 1. It must be that it's a tannaitic debate. Excuse me. Okay, it must be a tannaitic debate, and sneeze is not coming. Okay, it must be a tannaitic debate, and that's in the end what we're going to end. So our 10th option ended up getting us to, as I said, in answer to the question, which is not exactly a satisfactory answer because the answer is some machloket, but you could say, based on what the Gemara was saying, which is the Mishna sides on Mishamayim, and if the Mishna sides on that over the Braita, then maybe we'll prefer the Mishna, in which case we get to the answer that it's a God-given gift, and that's why you can't decide for your minor children. But the main thing being, it's a God-given gift, and that answers the big question that we had that we wanted to answer. Now we're going to have an easy time with this Mishnah, because other than one line, we've already learned this entire Mishnah yesterday, right? So it wasn't even like a few days ago, we just learned it, so it should be pretty easy. And in fact, this last case, we spent a long time on it already today. And by the way, the Gemara also dealt with it already, so the Gemara is not even going to deal with this, just with the last line, which we haven't yet seen. One can make an arrangement for oneself, for one's son, daughters who are Gdolim, for one's Eved or Shikha who are Gdolim, Al Yidei Ishto for one's wife, because they have enough. Right? They understand, they can say, yeah, I'm okay with that. We'll rather take the money, I won't work on the job. Avaleno could say, but he can't make that same arrangement. Not those 3 categories, the minor children, the minor slaves, and the animals, because they don't have the ability to decide and say, I'm okay with not eating on the job. Therefore, they can't. And again, the way we explained it now is that, right, this is saying because it's Mishamayim. God-given gift only if you say, I don't want the gift, but it's not your own money to decide about. If you say you hire a worker to work in your field, which is full of neta revai, and therefore they can't eat on the job until they bring it to Jerusalem, which means they can't eat on the job because they're not in Jerusalem, they can't eat anything. But if you didn't tell them beforehand, if the owner of the field didn't say, by the way, I'm hiring you to pick in my field this neta revai, the 4th year crop, podel machilan. So you redeem it and then feed them. In other words, you have to feed them, because otherwise, we saw yesterday, it's because it looks like a mekach ta'ut, like you trick someone in the arrangement. If it's at a later stage where it already is obligated in maaser, because it was already pressed fig cake, or it was barrels of wine that were already ready, but they opened up, or they unstuck the fig cakes, and you want someone to fix that, and it's already too late though, because it's already, you're supposed to take maaser, in which case we already learned that's the outer limit of this halacha. You can't eat on the job, but again, if you weren't told beforehand, you have to take, the owner has to tie the produce and then feed them, because again, it looks like you tricked them. Shomrei Peirot. Now our new topic. This is the last line of the Mishnah, and on this we're going to deal in the Gemara. Shomrei Peirot ochlim mihilchot medina v'lo min haTorah. If you're a watcher of a field, you're guarding a field, okay? The real big question here, and this is a machloket Rav and Shmuel, are you a worker or you're not a worker? Like a worker is someone who's working with the crops. This is, you're standing on the side, making sure nobody comes in. Is that considered a job, like a worker in a field, or is that like something else and then you can't eat? Well, according to the Mishnah, you're ochlim mehilchot medina, meaning based on custom of the land, or the rabbis instituted that you can eat, but not min Torah. But the Torah doesn't actually give you a right to eat. So the Gemara goes into this big machloket Rav and Shmuel, and then we're going to have questions on Shmuel, and then a braita to support Shmuel. Shomer, or I think it's a braita or a Mishna now, I forget. Oh no, it's from our Mishna, the proof from an earlier Mishna. Amarav, lo shanu ela shomrei ganot upardesim, afa shomrei gitot va'aremot ochlim min haTorah. So let's distinguish first, what are these things? A gina is a garden, and a pardes is an orchard. Usually, if you're watching that, what are you watching? You're watching them while they're growing. Now, if you remember, what was our halacha? When are you allowed to eat? From when they're ripe, when there's gemar malacha until there's gemar malacha l'maaseh. Remember, it was confusing. So we use gemar malacha in two ways. Gemar malacha means they're ready to be picked from that moment until the moment where they're already obligated to maaser. That's your window of eating. Well, what Rav says is, when we talk about these shomrim, we're talking about when there's shomrim at the early stage, meaning normally, why are the shomrim not allowed to eat from Torah law? Because it's too early a stage, not because we don't view a shomer as a worker. A shomer is a total worker in the field, regular like any other worker. But what's the problem? Usually their job is to watch things that aren't ripe yet. So therefore they can't eat from Torah law. But since they're working in a field, the rabbi said, we're going to let you eat anyway. But if you're talking about someone who's shomer gitot va'arimot, if you're talking about someone who's watching in the wine press or the olive press, or piles of grains and things like that, once it's already the stage where you're allowed to eat these things, well, then ochlim min haTorah, then they're like any other worker and they can eat by Torah law. Hasavar, and this is the big thing he disagrees with Shmuel about, because he holds mishamer ka'oseh ma'aseh dami. A shomer is like someone who's picking in the field. It's the exact same thing. And then, again, when it's ripe, you can eat by Torah law. Before it ripens, well, since the shomrim do a lot of work before it ripens, the rabbis allowed them to eat them anyway. And that was what the Mishnah is talking about. Shmuel has a totally different interpretation of the Mishnah, because his opinion is, we'll see at the very end, but shomer lav koseh ma'aseh. He said shomer is not like a worker in the field. When the Torah gave permission to a worker in the field, they were talking about an actual worker in the field, not a guard, not someone who's guarding the fields. That's something else. They have no rights to eat by Torah law, but the Torah allowed them to eat. Now, in which case is he going to allow them to eat? Well, only in the case that's parallel to when a worker can eat. And if it's not ripe, like in the Gina, the Pardes, they can't eat at all, not even by rabbinic law. That's what we're going to see here. Shmuel Amar, Lo shanu ela shomrei gitot va'aremot. When we say the Poel can eat by rabbinic law, we're talking about the one at the later stage, when they're watching the piles or the wine press. You can't eat it all in that early stage, because no worker can eat in that early stage. And because somebody guarding is not considered a worker. So that's their big debate. Now we're going to have two questions on Shmuel on this concept that a guardian, or guarding with someone who guards, a guard, I guess is a better word, a guard of a field is not considered a worker. Really? Let's look at this source. If you're watching a para aduma, now what we do is someone who had to watch it from the time they slaughtered it till the time it was turned into ashes. And anyone who deals with the para aduma, their clothes become impure. So also the guard. Now, if we don't view him as a worker, then his clothes should not be impure. So I'm a Rabba bar. Ula gzera shami aziz ba'everis. That's just for a side reason. It's a gzera de Rabbanan. We're worried that maybe while you're watching it, maybe you'll move something. Mativ Rav Kahana's second source. Hameshamer arba v'chamesh mishkaot. You're watching 4 or 5 different cucumber fields, or pumpkin fields, or gourd fields, something in that family, zucchinis. You can't eat all your food you want to eat that day from one. You have to split it up evenly. And if they're not like a worker, then on what basis are they eating? So I'm Rav Shimi Bar Ashi, right? Because remember, we assume they're watching a field before they ripen. So the Gemara is just going to end. And then remember, according to Shmuel, before they ripen, definitely you can't eat. The only chiddush is that even though you're not really a worker, you can eat at the later stage. So obviously we're going to explain it, talking about it at a later stage where it is already ripe. Amar Rav Shimi Bar Ashi ba'akulin shana. We're talking about ones that were uprooted from the ground already. They were picked. in which case you could eat. But they said, what do you mean? But then once these kishuim are picked already, they're already obligated in tithing, and it's too late. So if you remember, we had this already. Right? The fibers or the flour hasn't fallen off, and that's why it's at this in-between stage. We explained that source at the in-between stage where even Shmuel would agree, and that's how we resolve it. Now, Amar Rav Ashi, Kavatei Shmuel Mistaber. Now we're going to prove from the Mishnah all the way back in Daf Pei Zayin. You might not remember all this, but the Mishnah had said it's set up when you're allowed to eat from Gemar Malacha till the Gemar Malacha of the Maser, and when you're not allowed to eat. And it was very repetitive, the Mishnah, and that's what we're going to focus on here, because once it says what you can, it doesn't really need to tell you what you can't. It's implied. So ditnan, and there's probably something you didn't notice there, which now we're going to pay attention to. Elu ochalim min haTorah. These are people who can eat from the Torah. Why to add from the Torah? Because there's Torah and there's rabbinic. That's what we just said in our Mishnah. Right? And it gave all the criteria. From here, what can you infer from the Resha? It seems to imply these people can eat by Torah law, but there is a case where someone can eat by rabbinic law and not by Torah law. But in the Seifa, it says, Elu she'enam ochlim. Now, and then it tells you, and there's some people who can't eat. Now, if it wants to tell you they can't eat by Torah law, but they can't eat by rabbinic law, then you're going to be stuck, because you could have learned that from the Resha already. You don't need a line to say that. So, my einan ochlin, what does it mean then? There's those who can't eat. If you want to say, like I just said a second ago, that it means, well, there's some people who can't eat by Torah law, but can't eat by rabbinic law. Kind of Resha, you already get that from the first part. And from an inference from the first part, elalav, it must be there's people who can't eat at all. And my nihu, what is that? And right? The Mishnah had said who can't eat if it's attached to the ground before it was ripe. And then we're saying you can't eat at all. And that would obviously, then if you're a regular worker, obviously would include a shomer, pardes, and right, someone who's just a guard. And then it says, like Shmuel, which is they can't eat at all. Again, whether or not you accept this reading of the Mishnah is the question, but Rav Ashi seems to think that's the simple reading. Now, perhaps because we just talked about someone who guards a field, now we're going to talk about Arba shomrim, and now we're going to have a repeat of stuff we've seen already. But here is actually where it appears in the Mishnah. Arba shomrim heim. Okay, on this sheet, there's a chart. This is actually where the study guide ends, the chart of this. Charts out all the responsibilities of all the 4 shomrim. Okay, we've learned this already. Shomer chinam v'shoel nosei sachar v'socher. So we have someone who watches for free, someone who borrows, someone who gets paid to watch, and a paid bailey, and a renter. Shomer chinam nishba lakol. Okay, so shomer chinam can swear for everything other than obviously pshia. If they were they intentionally or close to intentionally did something wrong and did a bad job, and then something happened, right? Like they threw something across the floor and it miraculously broke, then obviously they're going to have to pay. But short of that, they don't have to pay, right? Which would be kinyeva va'aveda, meita machmat malacha, right? All those things. And okay, shoel mishalem et hakol. Okay, the shoel has to actually pay for everything. Okay, because right, except for there's one thing they don't have to pay for. It doesn't say in the Mishnah, but that's meita machmat malacha. Okay, you took the animal to work, you borrowed it for working, and it right, or the car, and it died in the middle for no apparent reason. That's different. But if ones happens, some unexpected circumstance, they actually have to pay. Nosei sachar v'asochel nishbayin al shvura v'al shvuya v'al hameta u'mishalmim et ha'aveda v'et hakneva. So they have to pay for lost or stolen, not like the shomer chinam. You get paid to watch, or you're renting, and they are exempt from ones. Okay, unexpected circumstances. So now they want to know, Mantana Arba Shomrim. Who's the one who holds this for Shomrim? Because really in the Torah, and we've seen this before, there's 3 sections. And they assume one is Shomer Chinam, the second is Shomer Sachar, the third is Shoel. The only one that's clear is the Shoel. The other 2, the rabbis just assume. And who holds this? That there are really 4, even though there's 3 in the Torah. I'm Rav Nachman, I'm Rabbi Meir. Our Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir. To which they said, wait a minute, I'm Rav Nachman. Mika the Leila Arba Shomrim? What do you mean? Everybody knows this 4 Shomrim. Who says there aren't 4 shomrim? This is Rabbi Meir's unique shita. They say, oh no. What I meant to say was, Mantana socher kenosei sachal. The renter, nobody really knows what the renter is like because it doesn't say so in the Torah. So who's the one who holds the renter is like a paid guard. Rabbi Meir, and that's Rabbi Meir. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? Rabbi Meir, you might remember this, a big machloket, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir. What's the halacha of a shomer? One says shomer chinam, one says shomer sachar, and there's debate about who says what, and that's what we're going to see right now. What do you mean? Rabbi Meir says the shomer is like an say sachar. The opposite, the Tanya, here's a brighta. Shomer ketzav mishalem. How does the renter pay? What's the level of responsibility? Rabbi Meir omer keshomer chinam, Rabbi Yehuda omer keshomer sachar. Rabbi Meir says it's a shomer chinam. That's not the Mishna. Rabba Baravua ipla katani. No, Rabba Baravua has the opposite version of the brighta, and that's what I was talking about. So our Mishnah matches Rabbi Meir if you hold by Rabba Baravua's version of Rabbi Meir. But wait a minute. There's only three really, because the socher is like the shomer sachar, that's counted as one. To which the obvious answer on Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, arba'a shomrim v'dinehem shlosha. There's four categories of people who guard objects, but there's only three halacha. There's three categories. Okay, the four fit into the three. There's three categories of laws. There's four categories of shomer. Now we're going to get into a very interesting machloket between Rabba. Abaye is going to have some issues with him, and then we're going to see that a bunch of rabbis held like the way Abaye was leaning. There was a ro'eh, a shepherd, who was watching animals on the banks of the river Papa. Okay, not connected to Rav Papa, it was called the river Papa. Now, this was a shomer sachar. Okay, we have somebody who was getting paid to watch these animals. He took them to the banks of the river, and one slipped and fell. Now, what do you call this? Because is this ones? On the other hand, he shouldn't have been bringing them to the banks of the river. So, Rabba said, this person's exempt. Amar, might have a little mail bed. He said, what could he have done? He's exempt, right? This is circumstances beyond his control, right? He didn't tell the animal to slip. He didn't push the animal in. He didn't. Turning out on a bed. Big question. Right. So, he continues and he says this very important line. Sorry, we're still in Rabba. He did what the average person does. Okay. In other words, he did as best as he could. Or he did what, not as best as he could, I shouldn't say that. It's the opposite. He did what is expected of most people. Okay. People take their animals to do this. Okay. This is like, I don't know, I once parked somewhere that was illegal, and like it was near a hospital and everyone was parked illegally, and I got a huge major ticket. And but like someone I know who was staying in the hospital said, oh yeah, everybody does it. Everybody doesn't help you, right? If you get caught. So everybody does it, but if the animal falls in, maybe it should be your fault. So Rabbi said, this is what everybody does. Okay. Or it's like, your kids tell you, what do you mean? Everybody's doing that, right? Does it mean it's okay just because everybody's doing it? So Amar Abaye, Ela me'ata, al lemata bi'idana da'ayle nashe, hachinami de patul. So wait, he says, you're getting paid to watch this animal. And then you go into the city, leave your animals outside the city, just like everyone does at let's say, 12 o'clock midday, everybody goes into the city, leaves their animals outside. And at that moment, something happens to it. You're going to claim that's onus and you're exempt? What do you mean? You left the animals. What were you getting paid to do if not to watch the animals? Amar Rabbi says, yeah, I have no problem with that. If everybody goes into the city then so what that you left the animals and something happened? That's not your fault. You did what everyone else did. So Abaye continues. He's still really troubled by this. Gana porta bidana gana winashe. You take a cat nap in the middle of the day. Everyone, 12:30, everybody kind of falls asleep, and they all go, or I don't know, here, siesta, right? Everybody closes their eyes, goes to sleep, and that's when something happened. What? You're going to say the person's exempt? They went to sleep on the job. Rabbi says, yeah, I have no problem with that. Rabbi has a very unique approach. As I said, we're going to see everyone disagrees with him later. And Abaye disagrees with him here. Now we're going to start bringing difficulties. Okay, we have three sources. Okay, first Abaye was just kind of attacking him with logic. Now we start attacking him with sources. Here's what's called onus that you're going to be exempt. Anything short of this, you're not exempt. Okay, this is a hard pasuk to read right now, but it's a pasuk in Eov, which describes terrible tragedies that befell him. Came Shva, okay, that's like a person, and took the children or took his family, and killed the children. So Amarle, and what do you see? That's onus, but anything else is not onus. Okay, basically we're going to say that's a case where the shomer sachar is exempt. Anything short of that, the shomer sachar has to pay. So Amarle hatam bechazane mata. Now we're going to distinguish between different types of shomrim. There's someone who gets paid. Okay, I say, I'm going to give 50 shekel to watch my item. Okay, I don't have huge expectations for you. But there's people who are called the shomrim of the city. They're very serious shomrim. If you hire them, you hire like the security, you hire a guy with security with a gun, all that. Yeah, you have expectations for them. They're going to be liable for anything unless it's short of this. Eitive, second question. And we're going to answer it in the exact same way. Okay, to the extent of, and we're now going to quote Yaakov when he goes to Lavan, he has this whole speech at the end when he says, I did all this for you, and this is what you do to me. Right? I was eating ice at night, like I worked all day and all night. I worked I worked really, really hard. So anything under that, like sleeping on the job, you'd obviously be responsible for. Okay, so they say, no, that's Yaakov is like a special level of shomer. So they say, what are you talking about? What? He was a shomer of the city? No way. No, he said to Lavan, what he was saying to Lavan in his speech was, I was the best of shomrim. I did it at the highest level. Why are you, what are you giving me problems for? Okay, third source against Rabbi. Okay, the important point, he was watching his flock, and then he left them. Okay, we're going to figure out, left them what? Like everyone else does, or maybe not. Okay, we'll get to it. It's not clear. He comes to the city. So he goes into the city, and then, lo and behold, the lion came up. A wolf came and killed the animal. Okay, there's a mistake here. It's not ein omrim. We don't say, oh, well, if he had been there, he would have saved the animal. Okay, because, right, who knows? But Ella, what do we do? So it's going to depend. This is going to make this source a little tricky. We assess. How big was this guy? How tough was he? Did he have a gun? Okay. If he could have saved, and yet he just left the flock, and this lion came and ate, then he's going to be chayav. But in lav, if he couldn't have saved the animal anyway, well, we're not going to make you chayav. You're patur. So now, what does that have to do with it? Well, my lav, the al idane, the aile inche. Now, we assume when he left them, we must have left them when everybody else went into the city. This shepherd went into the city as well. And then what would be? Well, he's going to be chayav if he could have saved the animal, right? That goes against Rabba. Rabba says you wouldn't be chayav. If you did what everyone else did, you're not responsible. No, you could just simply say, no, the reason why he's going to be chayav is because he went into the city when no one else goes into the city. He wasn't doing what everyone else does. He was totally irresponsible. And that's why. Well, then they say, if he was totally irresponsible, then there's a flip case, though. If he wouldn't have been able to save, he's exempt. Now, he shouldn't be exempt in that case. Why? If he was totally irresponsible, left the animals when nobody else left them, why would he be exempt in this case? This is a classic case of this is, he was totally irresponsible in the beginning. In the end, it was onus that happened. He wouldn't have been able to save anyway from that. But the halacha is, well, there's a debate about this. But if you were negligent in the beginning and then onus happened, right, it was unexpected damages, you're still liable. Okay, hopefully, I told you there would be a gefet. I think I mentioned there's hopefully coming up next week, 2 gefets on the last few days, one on Kimle b'derabamine and one b'tchilat tov b'shabs pabonus. They're both very basic topics. Just the translation to English is taking some time, but God willing, they'll be up next week. And these are 2 really interesting basic topics. So we don't have time to go into it, but that's a whole topic in of itself. And you should listen to Gefet. You'll get some extra information about it. Now, and by the way, I forgot to mention, Din and Daf went up this week. I'm actually blanking on what it was, just because I'm trying to do too many things. I have too much in my head right now. Just if someone can remind me. Let me try to find it. But Din and Daf went up on a topic we did a few days ago about, on a second, on Amir al-Akum, thank you, on telling Gentiles. Okay, can you tell a Gentile to do something for you? Also, these are all basic, really fascinating topics. So the extra content is really there to help you with, delve into those more in depth. Okay, Now, moving back, if you remember, it's also now on podcast, all these things. So if you prefer by podcast, you can find it on the Beyond the Dot podcast of Hadran. Okay, back to our topic. So you should be chayav if that's the case, because you were posheh in the beginning, you were negligent. So they say, no, we'll say it was the case where you went into the city when it wasn't the normal time, but why did you do it? To shama color ye, Baal, you heard the lion coming and you ran into the city. That's why you went in an atypical time. Okay, so now they're going to say, these are like questions on the question. So on the answers here, well, then we don't have to assess, could you have saved, could you have not saved? You were scared of the animal, you ran inside. No. You should have brought, when you ran into the city, because you heard the lion, you should have brought with you, get a team of people to come help you fight and get some weapons. Well, then, for saying that, now remember, the case was a shomer sachar case. So now they say, even if you're watching for free, you yourself, Rabbi, said you have to do this. And this is all Rabbi's answer to the case. And he says, but you yourself say it's not just a shomer sachar, it's even a shomer chinam. You're the one who said, shomer chinam, if you're a shomer chinam, an animal comes to attack, you're responsible to go get people and fight against it. If you don't do that, and you did nothing, and you just ran away, you're responsible, even as a shomer chinam. To which Rabba answers, and with this we'll end with this question, shomer chinam b'chinam, shomer sachar b'sachar. We're actually not going to totally end with it, but we're ending with the back and forth. Rabba answers, no. Why I said specifically shomer sachar is because if you get paid to watch, you have to go hire people to help you. If you're a shomer chinam, you just have to find people to do it for free. And if no one will do it for free, you're not liable. And that's why I was specifically talking about a shomer chinam, sachar, and that's how we explain the case, and that's how Rabba answers the question. Now we just have some questions on this case. Ad kama. To what extent, how much money do you have to spend to hire people to go save this flock of animals that you're watching? The animals are worth $1,000 altogether. You can hire people for up to $1,000. But wait, if these animals come and attack, and your animals are under attack, you have to now spend money to go protect them? That makes no sense. What do? You go get reimbursed from the owner. So now they say, okay, so we have $1,000 worth of animals. The owner can be liable in the end to have to pay the shomer sachar back $1,000 of money. Well, what did you help? Now you spent all the money, but just let it go, right? Lose the animals. Well, there's two reasons why he might want his own animals, even if he has to spend all the amount of what they're worth. Because they're his animals, he knows how they work, and he knows their strengths. He'd rather have his own animals back than go buy new ones. Or it's just a pain to go buy new ones. So that's why the shomer sachar has to go hire workers, even though in the end, the owner's going to have to reimburse. That was a side point. They say, no way, no how. We don't agree with your approach. The shomer sachar, and they say the following, the reason you're getting paid is not to do what everyone else does. The reason you're getting paid is to hold yourself to a higher standard. I paid you to protect my animals better than the average. And therefore, this is just not the case. They disagree with Rabba, and we're going to have a case. Bar'ada Savala, he was a Sabali, carried heavy loads. Havakama Abra Chayata Agamla Dinarish. He was bringing animals across the river, across the bridge, the Narish bridge. Okay, so he had other people's animals, and using them to carry loads, and one animal pushed the other. So they were walking in a row of animals. One knocked the other and off the bridge into the water, and Shadita B'maya fell into the water and drowned. Ata l'kamed Rav Papa hiding. Rav Papa made him liable. Amarle, he said, what could I have done? Right? It wasn't my fault. The animal pushed the other animal. This is honest. You should have passed them single file. Hamarle. So Bar'ada says to him, Yadat Bey, you have any relatives who would do that? Nobody does that. Again, same claim Rabba made, right? You don't have to do anything nobody else does. A lot of people tried to claim this before you, like Rabba, but nobody listened to them. We don't hold that way. Another case, which doesn't seem connected at first, then we're going to connect it. He gave linen or flax to the house of Runya to watch for free. Azal shabu sham temine. So shabu comes, this was a thief, and took it away. L'sofu karaganaf. In the end, they found out it was shabu who was the thief. Now, they didn't get it back yet from shabu. So the question is, if Runya was a shomer chinam and usually can just take an oath, can Runya take an oath and exempt himself when, in essence, he theoretically could just go to the thief and get the money back? So maybe Runya needs to pay and get the money back from the thief. Atal kamed Rav Nachman chayve. Rav Nachman said, yeah, Runya, you have to pay. Lema pliga de Rav Huna bar Avin. Maybe this is he disagrees with what Rav Huna bar Avin said. To Shalach Rav Huna bar Avin, he said, Nigdeva ba'ones. If something was stolen ba'ones, okay, it wasn't your fault. And then we find the ganav. Im shomer chinam hu, if he was watching for free, ratzah nishba, ratzah usei modin. You could either take an oath and exempt yourself, or you can pay and get it from the thief. But you don't have to. You can get exempt. So it sounds like he disagrees with the previous guy. Only if he was a shomer sachar, who, because the shomer sachar has to pay for Rabba and Abaye anyway, usei modin ve'eno nishba. So then you have to pay, and you can't take an oath, and you have to then, the shomer will get the money back from the thief. But Rava said, no. You didn't understand the case, and this is going to connect back to our topic. Hatam gavri de pur muska habu kaime. When it was stolen from Beirunya, there were policemen nearby. Di'i ramakala habu ate umatzunle. Runya was an irresponsible shomer because there were policemen right there. He could have started screaming, thief, 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 and the policeman would have come and helped. And he didn't. He just sat there doing nothing. That's why they made him responsible, but not having to do with the other thing, which again shows, right? If you don't do as much as you can do as a shomer, even a shomer chinam, right? When you had something very easy to do and you didn't, you're liable. Okay, I know it's a long daf. We're going to go a little farther. We're going to get to the bottom. Ze'ev echad, new Mishna. Ze'ev echad eino onesh. Shnei ze'evim ones. This is very simple. If there's one wolf who attacks, that's not onus. You have to fight against it. But two, that's already onus. Rabbi Yehuda Meir b'shlachat ze'evim afachad onus. When there's wild wolves, crazy ones running around, then even one is onus. Shnei klavim, 2 dogs, is not onus. But yadua habavli, only mentioned one time in the Mishna, this guy, yadua habavli, omer mishum Rabbi Meir, something of Rabbi Meir, miruach echad eno onus, mishnei ruchot onus. They come in 2 different directions, that's already onus. But 2 dogs in one direction, that's not. You have 1 dog coming there, 1 dog coming there, that you can feel attacked, that's onus. Halistim areza onus, robbers. That's onus, like they come and attack you, mug you. Hariv, Adov, Anamer, Vabar, Delas, Vanachash. These are 5 we saw in Bava that were all muad from the beginning, right? These are wild animals. Hare elu onus, that's onus. E matai, when is that? Bisman shabau me'elehen. This is if they came on their own. But holchin lemakom gdudei, holichan lemakom gdudei chayav listim eno onus. But if the shepherd led them to where there's people, crazy robbers or animals, wild animals, then that's not onus. Meta kedarka, if it died on its own, hareza onus, that's onus. Sikfa meta ain't onus. This is very, very intuitive. If you starved it and it died, that's not onus. I'll tell the rashet tzukim v'nafla hareza onus. If the animal went on its own up to a cliff and fell, it's onus. But he'elal rashet tzukim, if you brought it up to a cliffy, scary area, v'nafla v'meta, and it fell and died, that's not onus. Okay, this is very intuitive. Next, 2 very small things in the Gemara, and then we'll finish. Hatani. Doesn't it say in a Braita something that contradicts our Mishnah? When we talked about the wolves, echad onus, it said 1 is onus, and our Mishnah said 2 is. That Braita is Rabbi Yehuda, and it's talking about when there's a plague of these wild wolves. Halistim areze onus. Here's a really good question. Aman, lo ke gavra kame gavra. Well, lahade gavra. You're okay, let's take a guard, right? What's the guard's job? Someone comes and attacks, the guard's supposed to protect. So you're paid to watch this animal. Someone comes, aren't you supposed to fight against the person? 1 against 1. Well, it's when they have weapons, to which they ask the following question. What if the guard has weapons and the listim has weapons? So is he supposed to pull out his weapon? Now, here's a really good question, but this question will end with the answer. Mi amrina, do we say, okay, gavra lahadi gavra? Okay, 1 against 1, 1 with weapons, right? I think of like these ancient sword fights, go and fight to the death. Odilma, hai masar nafshe, v'hai lo masar nafshe. Or do we say, wait, the road has a gun to protect himself, or a sword, let's say, but he's not planning to fight and lose his life for this. Whereas the listim Mizuyan, who comes, he's ready to fight to the death. He's willing to be most. Is it fair to ask the roet to now fight to the death? That's not fair. So, mistabra, what you would have thought, dahai masar nafshe, v'hai lo masar nafshe. No, you don't have to fight against him. You can just run away. Okay, and you're not liable. Okay, I don't have time to really go over the daf, but you can do your own review of the topics. You can also look at the summary on the site. Sorry, it was such a long daf for a Friday. But I hope it's all clear now, and wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and Shem Shema B'Sorot Tovot.